I shouldn't have said anything because 30 seconds later the entire gate went silent like the air itself had been warned to stay still. The airport lights felt too bright, washing everything in a cold white glare that made people look unreal, like actors waiting for their cue. My coffee had gone cold in my hand, untouched, as I sat near gate 42, trying to keep my eyes open after a 12-hour shift that felt more like 20. Flights were delayed all over the board, voices echoing through the terminal, rolling suitcases dragging across polished floors, the low hum of exhaustion that only exists in places where people are always leaving something behind. I should have been thinking about getting home, about my apartment in Brooklyn, about sleep, but instead I was listening. Not on purpose. Not first. It started with a voice, low, controlled, speaking too fast for casual conversation. Russian. I didn't even realize I understood it until certain words caught in my chest like hooks. I grew up hearing it from my grandmother, quiet evenings in a small kitchen that smelled like tea and cinnamon. I hadn't spoken it in years, but I understood enough. Enough to know something was wrong. The man stood a few feet away, just outside the restricted crew area, wearing a pilot's uniform that looked almost right. Almost. His cap was slightly off, the badge too new, the posture too stiff. He had a headset pressed close, his voice barely above a whisper, but I caught fragments. Confirmed target after takeoff. My fingers tightened around the cup. Maybe I misheard. Maybe my brain was filling in gaps that weren't there. I told myself that. Try to believe it. But then he said one word clearly. Eliminate. The sound of it didn't belong in an airport. Not here, not surrounded by families and business travelers and people complaining about delays. My heart picked up, slow at first, then faster, like it was trying to warn me before my mind caught up. I looked around, expecting someone else to notice, someone to react, but no one did. People kept walking, phones in their hands, eyes on screens. Normal. Everything looked normal except him. Except the way he didn't move like he belonged. Except the way my instincts refused to quiet down. That's when the energy in the terminal shifted. Subtle. Almost invisible. Conversations lowered. People moved aside without knowing why. I followed their gaze and saw him. He didn't rush. Didn't need to. The man walked like the space already belonged to him. Like every step had been decided long before he took it. Tall. Dark suit tailored too perfectly to be off the rack. No visible security, but I felt them before I saw them. Men blending into the background, watching everything without turning their heads. He didn't look at anyone directly, yet everyone noticed him. Power doesn't announce itself. It rearranges the room. He stopped near the gate desk, checking something on his phone, calm in a way that didn't match the tension pressing against my ribs. I didn't know his name. I didn't need to. Men like him didn't exist in ordinary stories. And he was about to board that plane. The same plane. My pulse hit harder. The words echoed again. After takeoff. Target confirmed. I could feel the seconds slipping, each one heavier than the last. This wasn't my business. I could stand up, walk away, pretend I hadn't heard anything. That's what most people would do. That's what safe people do. But my feet didn't move. My chest felt tight, like the truth was trying to force its way out whether I wanted it to or not. I watched him take a step toward the boarding line, completely unaware, completely unbothered, and something inside me broke past fear. Before I could stop myself, before I could think about consequences or who he was or what he might do, I stood up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the floor, and every instinct I'd screamed that I was about to make a mistake I couldn't undo. I did not remember deciding to move. 1 second I was frozen in my seat. The next I was already stepping forward, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. My voice came before my thoughts could catch up. Do not board that plane. It came out sharper than I expected, louder, cutting through the steady noise of the terminal like something that did not belong. Heads turned. Conversations paused. The man in the suit stopped mid-step. For a moment, everything held still. Then it broke. 2 men appeared at my sides, so quickly I did not see where they came from. One of them caught my arm, firm but controlled, not hurting, just stopping me from taking another step. "Ma'am, you need to step back," he said, his tone calm, but leaving no room for argument. I tried to pull away, not to run, just to be heard. "You cannot let him get on that plane. I said, my voice lower now, but no less urgent. Something is wrong. The man I had called out to finally looked at me. Not a glance. Not curiosity. A full, direct look that felt like it stripped everything down to what mattered and dismissed the rest. His eyes were steady, unreadable, the kind that did not rush to conclusions but did not ignore possibilities either. He did not speak right away. He just watched me. Me, standing there in worn sneakers and a jacket that still smelled like coffee and long hours, being held in place like I had crossed a line I did not understand. Explain, he said finally. One word. Controlled. Not loud, but it carried. The kind of voice people listen to without knowing why. I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry. The pilot, I said. He was speaking Russian. He said things that do not belong in a cockpit. Words like target. Eliminate. After takeoff. I heard how it sounded as I said it. Unreal. Paranoid. The kind of thing people dismiss in seconds. One of the men holding me shifted slightly, like he had already decided I was overreacting. But the man in the suit did not look away. If anything, his focus sharpened. You understood him, he said. Not a question. A test. Yes, I answered. I grew up hearing it. I'm not fluent, but I know enough. A pause. Not long. Just enough to feel like time had stretched thin around us. And you were certain of what you heard, he said. I hesitated for half a second. Not because I doubted myself, but because I understood what certainty meant in a moment like this. Then I nodded. Yes. He studied me a moment longer, like he was measuring something I could not see. Fear, maybe, or truth. Then his gaze shifted, not to the gate, not to the plane, but to one of the men beside him. No words, just a look. The man nodded once and stepped away immediately, already speaking quietly into something hidden near his collar. The air changed again, subtle, but real. Movement without panic. Decisions happening beneath the surface where most people would never notice. The man in the suit stepped closer, just enough that I could feel the difference in space, like the distance between us had weight. If you are wrong, he said quietly, you just interrupted something you do not understand. His tone was not threatening. It was factual, a statement of reality. I know, I said. My voice surprised me by not shaking. But if I am right, you do not want to be on that plane. Another pause, this one heavier. Then, from somewhere near the gate desk, a voice cut through the tension. Attention passengers, this is a brief delay announcement. It sounded routine, almost boring, but the man in front of me did not move. Neither did I. We both knew that timing like this was never just coincidence. He held my gaze for one more second, then spoke again, softer now, but somehow more dangerous. Stay where you are. Not a request. Not even an order. A decision already made. And for reasons I cannot explain, I did not try to leave. The announcement should have sounded normal, but it did not. It stretched too long. The voice too careful, like someone choosing each word instead of reading from script. I felt it in the way the man in front of me did not react like the rest of the passengers. No frustration. No impatience. Just stillness. The kind that listens between the lines. Around us, people sighed, checked their phones, adjusted bags on their shoulders. Delays were part of travel. No one questioned them. But the men near him moved differently now. Subtle shifts. One repositioned near the gate entrance. Another angled his body toward the hallway, leading to the restricted crew area. Not blocking. Not obvious. Just present. I realized then that whatever world he belonged to, it did not wait for confirmation. It prepared. The man who had spoken into his collar returned, stopping just behind him. There is an issue with the flight crew, he said quietly. I should not have heard it, but I did. They're verifying identities now. A small silence followed. Not confusion. Calculation. The man in the suit nodded once, slow, deliberate, like a piece falling into place exactly where he expected it. Then his eyes came back to me. Not softer, not warmer, just more focused. Your name, he said. Naomi, I answered. Naomi Carter. Saying it out loud felt strange, like it suddenly carried more weight than it had a few minutes ago. He held my gaze for another second, then spoke as if committing it to memory. Naomi, The way he said it was not casual. It was precise. Behind him, the boarding area remained paused in that awkward space between routine and something else. The staff at the desk whispered to each other, glancing toward a hallway that was now closed off by two airport employees who had not been there before. Or maybe they had. Maybe I just had not been looking. My heart had not slowed. If anything, it beat harder now that something real was unfolding in front of me. I had not imagined it. I had not overreacted. The words I heard were not nothing. The man stepped slightly to the side, giving a clearer view of the gate. "Look," he said. I followed his line of sight. Two uniformed officials were speaking with someone just beyond the glass doors that led to the jet bridge. Another person stood behind them, not in uniform, watching everything too closely. It was the same feeling as before. Something almost right, almost belonging, but not quite. "You noticed one detail," the man said quietly. "Most people miss those." I did not know if it was a compliment or an observation. Maybe both. "I was not trying to notice anything," I said. "I just heard it." "That is usually how it starts," he replied. A faint sound came from the overhead speakers again, but this time it cut off before the message could finish, replaced by a brief static that made several people look up in confusion. Small things. Easy to ignore, unless you were already paying attention. His phone buzzed once in his hand. He glanced at it, his expression not changing, but something in his posture tightened, like a decision had just been confirmed. When he looked back at me, there was no hesitation left. "You were right to speak," he said. The words landed differently than I expected. Not dramatic, not loud, just certain, and somehow, that made them heavier. I exhaled a breath I did not realize I had been holding. For a second, relief flickered through me. Then it disappeared, just as quickly, because the way he said it did not sound like the end of something. It sounded like the beginning. He took one step closer, lowering his voice just enough that only I could hear. "But now," he continued, "you are part of it." I blinked, my mind trying to catch up. "Part of what?" I asked. He held my gaze, steady and unshaken, like he had already seen how this would unfold long before I spoke at all. "Whatever this was meant to be," he said quietly, "it did not work." A pause. Then, softer. "That means someone will want to know why." The noise of the airport returned around us, louder now, filling the space that had gone silent before. But it did not feel the same. Not anymore. Because this time, I knew something most people did not. And standing there, with his eyes still on me, I realized something else. Walking away was no longer an option. The realization did not come all at once. It settled slowly, like a weight pressing down on my chest, making each breath feel more deliberate than the last. Around us, the terminal tried to return to normal. A child laughed somewhere near the coffee stand. A couple argued quietly about a missed connection. The overhead screens flickered between departure times and delays. But none of it felt real anymore. Not after what he had just said. Not after the way his world had quietly shifted around mine without asking permission. "I did not ask for that," I said, my voice lower now, steadier than I expected. He did not react to the words. Not surprised. Not offended. Just acknowledging them as something already accounted for. "No one does," he replied. "That does not change anything." His phone buzzed again, longer this time. He glanced at it, then handed it off to the man beside him without even looking. Delegation, trust, or control. I could not tell which one mattered more. "They confirmed it," the man said quietly after reading the screen. "The pilot is not listed in the system. Credentials are false." My stomach dropped, even though part of me had already known. Hearing it said out loud made it real in a way that could not be undone. The man in front of me nodded once, then shifted his attention back to me like everything else was already handled. "You heard one voice," he said. "Did you see anyone else?" I tried to replay the moment in my head, forcing myself to focus past the panic I had felt earlier. "There was another presence," I said slowly. I could not see clearly, but it sounded like someone responding. Short answers, confirming things. His eyes narrowed slightly. Not in suspicion, but in thought. "So it was not just one mistake," he said. "It was planned." The word hung between us, heavier than anything else that had been said. Planned. Not random. Not accidental. Intentional. I felt a chill run through me. even under the constant hum of warm air from the overhead vents. What happens now? I asked. It was the wrong question. I knew at the moment I said it. Not because it was irrelevant, but because it assumed I had any control over the answer. He looked at me for a long second before responding, like he was deciding how much truth to give me. Now, he said quietly, we remove the uncertainty. I did not know exactly what that meant, but I understood enough to feel the shift in the air again. Movement began to ripple outward from him. Subtle commands passed without words, positions adjusted, attention redirected. The men around him were no longer waiting. They were acting. Still calm, still controlled, but no longer still. I became aware of how close he was standing now. Not invading, not threatening, just close enough that I could feel the presence of him in a way that made everything else fade slightly into the background. Naomi, he said, and the way he said my name made me look up immediately. Listen carefully. My pulse quickened again, not from fear this time, but from the weight in his tone. You are going to stay with me, he continued, until I say otherwise. It was not phrased as a suggestion, not even as an order. It was simply a decision that had already been made. I have a flight, I said automatically, gesturing vaguely toward the gate as if that still mattered. A flicker of something crossed his expression. Not amusement, not irritation, just a brief acknowledgement of how different our priorities were. No, he said, you had a flight. The correction landed harder than it should have. Because he was right. Whatever had been normal about. My day had ended the moment I stood up and spoke. A sharp voice came over the speakers again, clearer this time. Attention passengers for Flight 287. Boarding has been suspended. Please remain in the terminal area. A wave of confusion moved through the crowd. Questions, complaints, frustration. But beneath it, I could feel something else building. Something quieter. Something aware. He did not look at the gate again. He was still watching me. Measuring. Deciding. You changed something today, he said softly. That does not disappear. I swallowed, my throat suddenly tight. I was just trying to help. I know, he said. And for the first time, there was something different in his voice. Not softer, but more human. That is why you're still standing here. The words sent a strange chill through me. Not because of what they implied, but because of how easily he said them. Like survival was not something guaranteed. Like it was something given, or taken. He straightened slightly, the moment shifting again as the world around him caught up to whatever decision he had already made. Then he spoke one last time, his voice low enough that only I could hear. Stay close to me. A pause, just long enough to let the meaning settle in. You are not safe anymore. The words did not hit me all at once. They lingered, echoing in the space between us long after he said them. You are not safe anymore. It should have sounded dramatic like something out of a movie, but it did not. It sounded simple, certain, like a fact that had already been decided without my input. I became aware of everything at once. The distance to the nearest exit. The people moving past us without noticing anything unusual. The way the overhead lights reflected off the polished floor, too clean, too bright. My senses sharpened in a way that made everything feel louder, closer, more real. What does that mean? I asked, my voice quieter now, but not weak. I needed to hear him say it. Needed to understand what I'd stepped into. He did not answer right away. Instead, he looked past me for a brief second, scanning something I could not see. Then his attention returned, steady and unbroken. It means, he said slowly, someone expected a different outcome today. I frowned slightly, trying to follow. And, now that did not happen, they will adjust, he finished. The word adjust should not have carried so much weight, but it did. It implied movement, reaction, awareness. My chest tightened again. You think they know about me? I asked. For the first time, there was no pause before his answer. I do not think, he said. I assume. The certainty in his voice made my stomach drop in a way nothing else had yet. I had not just overheard something. I had interrupted something. And now, whether I wanted to or not, I was part of whatever came next. The man beside him stepped closer, speaking low but urgent. We should move, he said. Too many variables here. The man in front of me gave a slight nod, already in motion before the conversation ended. He turned, expecting me to follow, not checking if I would. That was the thing about him. He did not ask. He did not convince. He moved, and the world adjusted around him. I hesitated for half a second, my instincts pulling me in two directions. Stay. Walk away. Pretend none of this was real. But my feet betrayed me again, stepping forward to match his pace. Where are we going? I asked as we moved through the terminal, weaving past travelers who had no idea anything had changed. Somewhere quieter, he said. Somewhere we can see clearly. His hand did not touch me, but I could feel the presence of it near my back, guiding without forcing. It was subtle, controlled, the kind of movement that did not draw attention, but still ensured I stayed exactly where he needed me to be. We passed the gate, the crowd growing denser for a moment before thinning again as we turned down a less crowded corridor. The noise of the main terminal faded slightly, replaced by a softer hum of distant announcements and footsteps echoing against walls that felt too clean, too empty. You are calm, he said suddenly, glancing at me briefly as we walked. The observation caught me off guard. I did not feel calm, I admitted, but I am not panicking. He nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. That matters, he said. People who panic miss details. I let out a small breath, not quite a laugh. I think I have noticed enough details for one day. That earned the smallest shift in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close enough to register. We reached a quieter section near a row of closed shops. The lights dimmer here, the air cooler. He stopped, turning to face me fully again. The men around him spread out without being told, positioning themselves in a way that felt both casual and deliberate. Watching. Always watching. Tell me everything again, he said. From the beginning. I nodded, forcing my mind back through the moment, replaying every sound, every word, every detail I tried not to forget. As I spoke, his eyes stayed on me, unblinking, focused in a way that made it clear nothing I said was being dismissed. When I finished, a silence settled between us. Not empty. Full. Like something was being built inside it. Then he spoke, softer now, but more certain than before. You did not just hear a conversation, he said. You interrupted a plan. The words landed heavy, final. And standing there, in a quiet corner of an airport that suddenly felt very far from normal, I realized something else I could not ignore. Whatever this plan had been, it was not finished yet. The silence after his words did not feel like an ending. It felt like pressure building. You interrupted a plan. The sentence stayed with me, replaying in my head as if repeating it might make it smaller, easier to understand. It did not. It only made everything sharper. Then they will try again, I said quietly, more to myself than to him. He did not correct me. That was answer enough. One of the men nearby shifted slightly, touching his ear as if listening to something I could not hear. His gaze flicked toward the hallway we had just left, then back to the man in front of me. A silent exchange passed between them. Information without explanation. We have confirmation, the man said. The aircraft is being secured. Secondary checks in progress. The words sounded official, controlled, but there was something underneath them. Something that said this was bigger than a simple delay. The man in the suit nodded once, then looked at me again. Always back to me, like I had become part of the equation he was solving. Naomi, he said, his voice quieter now, but more focused than before. Think carefully. Was there anything else? I closed my eyes for a second, forcing myself back into that moment. The voice, the tone, the slight hesitation between words. He sounded careful, I said slowly, like he was not just talking, like he was waiting for instructions. His gaze sharpened, and the response? Short, controlled, almost like confirmation codes. Not a conversation, more like steps. I opened my eyes again, meeting his. It did not sound like improvisation. A brief pause followed, but this time it was different. Not uncertainty, recognition. Then this was coordinated, he said. Not isolated. The word coordinated settled heavily between us, adding another layer to everything I was already trying to process. This was not just one person making a mistake. It was something structured, intentional. My chest tightened again, but I forced myself to stay steady. Panic would not help. He had already said that. Why would someone do that on a plane? I asked. It felt like a simple question, but the answer behind it was anything but. He held my gaze for a moment before answering, like he was deciding how much to say. Because it is controlled, he said. Limited exits. Predictable environment. Once you're in the air, options disappear. The way he explained it made it sound almost clinical. Not emotional. Not dramatic. Just logic. That made it worse. And you were the target, I said before I could stop myself. It was not a guess anymore. It was the only thing that made sense. He did not deny it. That was all the confirmation I needed. A quiet tension filled the space again, heavier now that the truth had been spoken out loud. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady the thoughts racing through my mind. Then why are we still here? I asked. If they fail, will they not just leave? He shook his head slightly. No, he said. People who plan like this do not walk away without understanding what went wrong. The implication settled in immediately. They would look. They would trace. They would find a break in their plan. And that break was me. My fingers curled slightly at my sides, not out of fear but awareness. This was real. This was happening. And there was no version of this where I simply went back to my normal life and forgot it. He must have seen something in my expression because his voice shifted just slightly when he spoke again. Not softer, but more deliberate. You are thinking too far ahead, he said. Focus on what matters now. I looked at him, trying to understand how he could stay so steady in the middle of all of this. And what matters now? I asked. He held my gaze, unwavering. Position, he said. Awareness. Control. Each word landed with precision, like steps in a process I had not been trained for, but was now expected to follow. Before I could respond, the man beside him spoke again, this time more urgently. There is movement near the crew corridor, he said. Une identité personnelle. The air shifted instantly. Not panic, not chaos, just a tightening. Focus sharpening into something more active. The man in front of me did not turn immediately. He stayed where he was, looking at me for one last second, as if making a final decision. Then he spoke, low and certain. Stay behind me. It was not a suggestion. It was instinct wrapped in command. And for reasons I no longer questioned, I did exactly that. The shift was immediate. Not loud. Not chaotic. Just a tightening of the space around us, like the air itself had decided to pay attention. I moved without thinking, stepping behind him as he had said, close enough that I could feel the controlled stillness in the way he stood. Not tense. Not rushed. Just ready. The men around us adjusted their positions in near silence, spreading out with a precision that made it clear this was not the first time they had done something like this. One of them took a step toward the corridor, another angled slightly to block a side path without making it obvious. To anyone else, it would have looked like nothing. To me, it felt like everything had changed. Where? He asked quietly, not turning his head. Into the corridor, the man replied. Near the service door. I followed his line of sight, my eyes adjusting to the dimmer lighting. At first, I saw nothing unusual. Just a maintenance door, slightly ajar, and a shadow shifting in a way that did not match the steady rhythm of passing travelers. Then I saw him. Not clearly. Just enough. A figure standing too still, half hidden by the edge of the doorway, watching in a way that felt wrong. Not curious. Not lost. Focused. Waiting. My breath caught for half a second before I forced it steady again. That is him, I whispered, not even sure how I knew. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the same feeling I had back at the gate. Something that did not belong. The man in front of me did not react outwardly, but I felt the shift in him. Subtle, intense sharpening. Stay behind me, he repeated, quieter this time, as if reinforcing something already understood. I nodded, even though he could not see it. The figure near the door moved slightly, just a shift of weight, but it was enough. Enough to confirm that he was aware. That he was watching us the same way we were now watching him. A moment passed, then another. No one rushed. No one made the first move. It felt like standing on the edge of something invisible, waiting to see who would step forward first. The man beside us spoke again, lower this time. He is not leaving. No, the man in front of me said. He is assessing. The words settled heavily in my chest. Assessing. just like him. Two sides of something I did not fully understand, measuring each other without saying a word. The overhead lights flickered slightly, just for a second, but it was enough to make the shadow near the door shift again. My eyes tracked the movement, catching a glimpse of a sleeve, the edge of a uniform that looked too clean, too new, just like before. "He is not airport staff," I said quietly. "No," he replied. "He is not." The confirmation should have made me feel validated. Instead, it made everything feel more real, more dangerous in a way that was not loud or obvious, but controlled and deliberate. The figure took one step forward, just enough to be more visible now, but still far enough to remain out of reach. Not approaching, not retreating, just present, watching. The man in front of me shifted his stance slightly, not aggressive, not defensive, just aligning himself between me and the corridor in a way that felt instinctive. Protective without saying the word. "He knows," I said, the realization hitting me all at once. "He knows something went wrong." "Yes," he said. "No hosetaschen." No doubt. And now he's deciding what to do about it. The silence stretched again, heavier this time, filled with unspoken possibilities. My pulse beat steadily in my ears, but I did not look away. I could not, because whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain. This was not over. Not even close. The man in front of me spoke one last time, his voice low, controlled, and certain. "Do not react," he said, "no matter what you think you see." And standing there, with that figure still watching from the edge of the corridor, I understood exactly what he meant. This was not about what had already happened. This was about what came next. The space between us and the figure did not close, but it changed. It felt thinner now, like something invisible had been drawn tight, ready to snap if either side moved too quickly. I focused on my breathing, slow and steady, just like he had said without saying it. "Do not react." The words echoed in my head, anchoring me in place even as my instincts told me to look away, to step back, to do anything that would break the tension pressing against my chest. But I stayed. The figure near the service door shifted again, this time more deliberate. One step forward into the light, just enough for me to see more clearly. The uniform was wrong. Not in a way most people would notice, but I did now. The fabric was too stiff, the insignia slightly off-center like someone had studied the details but had never lived in them. My stomach tightened. He was not trying to blend in anymore. He was letting himself be seen. "Why is he not leaving?" I whispered, barely moving my lips. The man in front of me answered without turning. "Because leaving confirms failure," he said. "Staying gives him information." Information. The word made everything sharper. This was not just about what had already happened. It was about what he could still learn. The figure's head tilted slightly, not enough to be obvious, but enough to show awareness. Of us. Of him. Of me. I felt it then, clear and unmistakable. He was not just watching the man in front of me. He was watching me too. My chest tightened again, but I forced myself to stay still. "Do not react." The man in front of me shifted slightly, just a fraction, but it changed everything. He was no longer just standing between me and the corridor. He was placing himself there with intent, blocking lines of sight in ways I did not fully understand but instinctively trusted. "It is adjusting," the man beside him said quietly. "Yes," he replied. "So are we." The calm in his voice did not waver, and somehow that steadiness anchored me more than anything else. Around us, the distant noise of the airport continued like nothing had changed. Announcements echoed faintly. Footsteps passed to the far end of the corridor. Somewhere, a rolling suitcase clicked rhythmically against tile. Ordinary sounds. A normal world continuing just out of reach. The figure took another step forward, then stopped again. Still not approaching. Still not retreating. Testing the space between us. I realized then that this was not about confrontation. It was about control. About who moved first. About who revealed more. The man in front of me spoke again, his voice low and even. "He is looking for confirmation." "Of what?" I asked. "Of you," he said simply. The words hit harder than anything else had. My breath caught for a split second before I steadied it again. "Me?" I repeated, quieter now. "Yes," he said. You are the variable he did not account for. Variable. Not person. Not witness. A change in the equation. I swallowed, forcing the thought down before it could take control of me. I cannot afford to feel small right now. Not here. Not in this moment. The figure's gaze did not break. I could feel it, even without looking directly. Measuring. Comparing. Deciding. Then, slowly, almost casually, he reached up and adjusted the edge of his sleeve. A small movement, meaningless to anyone else. But the man in front of me noticed it instantly. I felt the shift in him, sharper this time. Not fear, not panic. Recognition. Signal, he said quietly. The word barely left his lips, but it changed everything. The men around us moved, not fast, not abrupt, but coordinated in a way that made it clear this moment had been anticipated. Positions tightened. Lines closed. The space around us became smaller, more controlled. I did not move. I did not speak. I just stayed exactly where he had told me to be. The figure by the door lowered his hand, the smallest hint of something unreadable crossing his posture. Not frustration, not surprise, just acknowledgement. Then, for the first time since I had noticed him, he stepped back. One step, slow, deliberate, not retreating in fear, retreating by choice. My pulse thudded in my ears as I watched, understanding settling in piece by piece. This was not over. It had not ended. It had only shifted. The man in front of me did not relax. If anything, his focus sharpened further, tracking every movement until the figure disappeared back into the shadows beyond the service door. The corridor felt empty again, but it was not the same kind of empty as before. This one held something unresolved, something unfinished. He remained still for a moment longer, then spoke, his voice low but certain. Now we know. A pause, just enough to let the weight of it settle. They're watching us too. The corridor did not feel empty after he disappeared. It felt watched, like the absence he left behind had weight, pressing into the space in a way that made it impossible to forget he had been there at all. I stayed exactly where I was, just behind him, my eyes fixed on the service door even though there was nothing to see anymore. They're watching us too. His words settled slowly, but once they did, they changed everything. Because it meant this was no longer one-sided. It meant whatever had been set in motion was still moving. Just differently now. I exhaled carefully, keeping my movements small, controlled like I had learned in the last few minutes. So, what happens next? I asked quietly. This time, he did not answer right away. He stood still, his gaze still directed toward the empty corridor, as if he could still see something the rest of us could not. Then, slowly, he turned back to me. The intensity in his eyes had not lessened. If anything, it had deepened. Now, he said, we changed the direction. I frowned slightly, trying to follow. Change it how? He studied me for a second, like he was deciding how much I was ready to understand. Then he stepped closer, just enough that his voice did not need to rise above the quiet hum of the corridor. Right now, they think they are observing, he said. They think they still have time to adjust their plan. A pause, just long enough for the meaning to settle. We take that away from them. The clarity in his tone made something in my chest tighten again. Not fear this time. Something sharper. Awareness. You're going to move, he continued. With me. Exactly as I say. No hosetaschen. It was not a question. It was a path already decided. I nodded once, because at this point, there was no part of me left that thought I could step outside of this. Okay, I said. The word felt small compared to everything else, but it was enough. He turned slightly, signaling without words, and the men around us shifted again, tightening the formation in a way that made our movement feel both protected and deliberate. Not rushed. Never rushed. We walked back toward the main terminal, he said quietly. Like nothing has changed. I almost laughed at that, but the sound never came out. Because everything had changed. But I understood what he meant. Appear normal. Stay controlled. Do not give anything away. We started moving, our steps measured, blending back into the wider flow of the airport as we left the quieter corridor behind. The noise returned gradually. Announcements. Conversations. The rolling rhythm of luggage across tile. Ordinary life continuing, unaware of what had just unfolded a few hundred feet away. I kept my pace steady, matching his without needing to look at him. My senses stayed sharp, tracking movement without turning my head, noticing reflections in glass, the way people shifted around us. I was not just walking anymore. I was paying attention. Good, he said quietly, just loud enough for me to hear. You are learning. The words surprised me more than they should have. Not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. Not as praise, not as approval, just as a fact. We reached the edge of the main terminal again, the open space expanding around us, bright and loud and deceptively normal. He slowed slightly, just enough for me to step closer without thinking about it. Then he spoke again, lower this time. The words meant only for me. From this point on, he said, you do not leave my side. My breath caught for a second, not from fear, but from the finality in his tone. This was not temporary, not until things calmed down. This was something else, something that extended beyond this moment. What? I asked before I could stop. Myself. He looked at me then, fully, his gaze steady in a way that made everything else fade slightly into the background. Because, he said quietly, you saw something you were not supposed to see. A pause. Then, softer, but somehow more certain. And you matter now. The words lingered, heavier than anything else he had said. Not safe. Not random. Not unnoticed. Matter. I swallowed, my thoughts trying to catch up with the reality I had stepped into. Around us, the airport continued like nothing had changed. But standing there, with his presence steady beside me, and his world closing in around mine, I understood one thing with absolute clarity. I had not just stopped him from boarding that plane. I had stepped into a life that was never meant for me, and there was no going back.